What would you do if your king looked you in the eye and ordered you to march to a certain death? Not a possible death, but a mathematical certainty. If your sole mission was to stand between the largest army ever assembled and the fate of your world, knowing there would be no journey home. Feel the suffocating heat of the Greek summer, trapped in a pass so narrow you can almost touch both walls with outstretched arms. Smell the mixture of sweat, fear, and the salty, sulfuric scent of the hot springs that give this hellish place its name. Hear the low, terrifying rumble of hundreds of thousands of men and beasts approaching, a human earthquake that shakes the ground beneath your sandals. You see the sun glinting off a sea of bronze shields, your only family on this, your last day on Earth. This is not the plot of an action movie. This was the suicide mission accepted by King Leonidas and his personal guard in the year 480 BC. What you are about to hear is not just the account of a legendary battle, it is the chronicle, day by day, of the final 72 hours at the Hot Gates, from the perspective of the men who became the wall that stopped an empire. To understand the madness and glory of Thermopylae, you must feel the panic that gripped Greece in the summer of 480 BC. This was the Second Persian invasion. Xerxes, the great king of the Persian Empire, had amassed an army of unprecedented scale, a force so vast it was said to drink entire rivers dry. His goal was simple and absolute: to avenge his father's humiliating defeat at the Battle of Marathon 10 years earlier, and to erase the dangerous idea of Greek freedom from the map forever. Greece, in contrast, was a patchwork of small, terrified, and disunited city-states. Many had already surrendered to Xerxes, offering earth and water as a sign of submission. Athens, the Persian king's primary target, was in a state of panic. The Greek strategy, forged in desperation, was to use their only advantage: geography. A small land force, led by the legendary warriors of Sparta, would block the narrow pass of Thermopylae, the Hot Gates. Simultaneously, the Greek fleet, led by Athens, would block the narrow channel of Artemisium. The key was that one operation could not succeed without the other. The army had to hold the Persians on land so the fleet could fight at sea. The objective at Thermopylae was never to win. It was to hold. It was to buy time. Precious time for the fleet to engage the Persian ships, and for the rest of the Greek city-states to hopefully muster their forces. It was, from the very beginning, a calculated sacrifice. The first day of battle was a brutal and bloody lesson for Xerxes. It was the day the god king learned that his overwhelming numerical superiority was useless against geography and the inhuman discipline of the Spartans. Imagine the scene. The hoplite phalanx forms, a wall of shields and spears that completely blocks the narrow pass. Feel the claustrophobia, the weight of your 15-kilo bronze shield, the aspis on your left arm. It protects not only you but also the right side of the man next to you. You are a single organism. You hear the whistle of thousands of Persian arrows raining down, darkening the sun, and you remember the famous Spartan reply, "Good, then we will fight in the shade." You feel the brutal impact as the first wave of Persian troops crashes against your wall. The work is exhausting, pushing, stabbing with the spear, the dory, over and over, holding the formation under constant pressure. But here we unveil the first myth. It was not just 300 Spartans. The initial Greek force was about 7,000 men, a coalition of Thebans, Thespians, Phocians, and other allies. Leonidas's tactical genius was to use a rotation system. Small units would fight on the front line for a short period, then retreat behind the phalanx to rest, drink, and catch their breath. This ensured the Persians always faced a wall of fresh men and sharp spears. Now, put yourself in the shoes of a young hoplite from Thespiae. You have never seen anything like the discipline of the Spartans. You fight with your stomach churning with fear, but the unflappable calm of Leonidas, fighting on the front line, and the solidity of the shield wall beside you, give you courage. You survive the first day, exhausted, covered in blood and sweat, but with a savage euphoria. You have stopped the greatest army in the world. Frustrated and humiliated, on the second day, Xerxes unleashed his secret weapon. His elite unit, the king's personal guard, the 10,000 immortals. Their name came from the fact that if one fell, he was immediately replaced, always maintaining their number. They were sent to break the Greek line once and for all, and they failed as spectacularly as the regular troops. Imagine the contrast. The immortals, with their scale armor and wicker shields, were more agile than the Greek hoplites, but they were far less protected. The sound of Persian steel glancing uselessly off the thick bronze cuirasses and shields of the Spartans filled the air. The Spartans used one of their most famous tactics, the feigned retreat. They would fall back in apparent disarray, tempting the immortals to break their own formation and rush into a chaotic pursuit. And then, at the precise moment, the Spartans would turn as one, reform their shield wall in an instant, and slaughter the now disorganized and exposed Persians. The psychological impact on Xerxes was devastating. The historian Herodotus recounts that the great king leaped from his observation throne 3 times, terrified by the carnage his elite army was suffering. He, who considered himself a living god, was being humiliated by a handful of men in a dusty pass. The morale of the Persian army, built on the idea of their king's invincibility, began to crumble. At the center of it all was Leonidas. He was not a general watching the battle from a safe hill. He was on the front line, covered in blood and dust, fighting alongside his men. His physical presence, his calm, and his courage were the center of gravity for the entire Greek defense. He was not just the king of Sparta, he was the first soldier of Greece. But who was the enemy? To understand the battle, we must humanize him. An immortal soldier was not a faceless monster. He was an elite warrior, likely from the heart of the empire, from Persia or Media. He fought for duty, for honor, and for the glory of his king. He was a professional soldier, proud of his unit and his service. And the common Median or Scythian soldier who formed the first waves, he was probably a conscript, a farmer or a shepherd forcibly recruited from a remote corner of the vast empire. He fought thousands of miles from his home without truly understanding why, and often, as Greek historians relate, he was whipped forward by his own officers into a wall of bronze spears. His motivation was fear and obedience. The motivation of the Greeks was the defense of their homes, their land, and their freedom. In that contrast of wills lay the true difference. The Greek wall, impenetrable by brute force, was finally overcome by betrayal. Not by Persian military genius, but by the greed of a local man. Imagine the darkness in the mountains flanking the pass, the sound of the stealthy footsteps of thousands of immortals. They are being guided by a man named Ephialtes, a local shepherd who knows a secret path, a goat track that bypasses the Greek position. Feel the bitterness of the betrayal. Ephialtes was not doing it for ideology. He was doing it for a promise of Persian gold. His name, in Greek, would forever become synonymous with nightmare. The path was known to the Greeks. Leonidas's fatal mistake was to entrust its defense to a contingent of 1,000 soldiers from Phocis. But the Phocians, stationed high on the mountain, were caught by surprise in the darkness. After a brief and symbolic volley of arrows, they broke ranks and fled. Abandoning the path, the fate of the pass's defenders was sealed. At dawn, Leonidas receives the news. A scout comes running, breathless. They are surrounded. The battle is lost. His mission to block the pass has failed. Now, he faces a new and terrible choice. He can order a retreat, try to save his life and the lives of his men, or he can stay and forge a legend that will change the course of history. Leonidas's most important act was not his death, but the decision he made in the tense dawn of the 3rd day. He convenes a council of war. The sound of arguments fills the air, but his decision is firm. He orders the bulk of the Greek army to retreat, to escape while they can, to live to fight another day. Imagine the bittersweet sight of the columns of Greek allies marching south towards safety. It is the sound of survival, but also of abandonment. Soon, the pass falls silent. Only a handful of men remain, awaiting the end. But who stayed, and why? The 300 Spartans stayed because the law of Sparta was simple and absolute. Never retreat, never surrender. To return to Sparta after a retreat was a fate worse than death. The 700 Thespians, led by their general Demophilus, also stayed. And their decision is perhaps the most heroic act of the entire battle. No law compelled them to stay. They were free men, from a city that would be one of the first to be razed by Xerxes. They voluntarily chose to die alongside the Spartans and the 400 Thebans. History is darker with them. Thebes was suspected of sympathizing with the Persians. It is very likely that Leonidas forced them to stay as hostages to ensure their loyalty to the very end. The mood of the men who remained has changed. Fear has vanished, replaced by a cold, fatalistic resolve. They are no longer soldiers on a mission. They are a sacrifice. They prepare for their beautiful death, the kalos thanatos, the highest ideal of the Greek warrior, to die gloriously for their homeland. But was it just a military decision? One must consider the prophecy. Before the battle, the oracle at Delphi had given Sparta a terrible prophecy. Either Sparta would be destroyed by the invaders, or a Spartan king would have to die. Leonidas, who had sons to continue his lineage, was chosen to lead this mission for this very reason. Did he go to Thermopylae knowing he was the sacrifice the gods demanded to save his city? This transforms his death from a military tragedy into the fulfillment of a religious mission. And strategically, his sacrifice was not in vain. It bought the necessary time. It allowed the Greek fleet, which had also suffered heavy losses at Artemisium, to retreat in good order. And, most crucially, it gave time for the city of Athens to be completely evacuated. The death of Leonidas was the seed that would blossom into the decisive Greek victories at the naval battle of Salamis that same year, and at the land battle of Plataea the following year, which would end the invasion. The last stand was not a desperate, cowering defense. It was a furious, suicidal charge, designed to inflict maximum damage on the Persian army and to die with maximum glory. Leonidas's famous order echoes in the morning, "Eat a good breakfast, men, for tonight we dine in Hades." They charge out of the pass, into the more open ground, seeking combat. It is a chaos of steel and blood. When their long spears break, they draw their short swords, the xiphos, and continue to fight hand to hand. Leonidas falls, and a fierce battle erupts over his body. The Greeks recover it, driving the Persians back time and again. Finally, the survivors, outnumbered and exhausted, retreat to a small hill within the pass for their final stand. Imagine the scene. Surrounded on all sides by thousands of Persians, they fight, first with their broken swords, then with their bare hands and teeth, until a rain of thousands of Persian arrows finally silences them all. Xerxes' fury is such that, in an act of sacrilege, he orders Leonidas's body to be beheaded and his head impaled on a spike, a gesture that reveals not only his rage, but the deep frustration and bitter respect he felt for the man who had humiliated him. The story of their sacrifice spreads like wildfire throughout Greece. It is not told as a story of defeat, but as a battle cry, an example of the price that must be paid for freedom. The epitaph, later inscribed at the site of the last stand, sums it all up. "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." Imagine the silence after the battle. Xerxes walks through the pass, among tens of thousands of his own dead, to find the bodies of just over 1,000 Greeks. On the small hill, he sees the remains of the last defenders, bristling with arrows like a porcupine. He has won the pass, but he has lost the psychological war. The ghost of Leonidas and his men will haunt him to the end. Thermopylae was not a military defeat. It was the forging of an idea. The idea that something greater than one's own life is worth dying for, that freedom is not free, and that a handful of free men, in the right place at the right time, can show an empire the true meaning of fear. It became the genetic code of Western heroism. Was Leonidas' sacrifice an act of military hubris doomed to failure? Or was it the most brilliant strategic move of the war, changing the course of history through a defeat? Let us know your opinion in the comments. If this journey has shaken you, subscribe to Chronicles of Steel. Here, we don't just tell history, we relive it.